The day my parents left, I was 6 years old. I remember standing at the doorway of my aunt's house, holding onto a tattered toy car while my father bent down, patted my head once, and said, "Be good for your aunt." My mother kissed my cheek quickly, like she was afraid of lingering too long, then turned away before I could grab her hand. And just like that, they were gone. If you've ever felt abandoned or betrayed by family, this story is for you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment to share your own story. I'd love to hear it. At 6 years old, I didn't fully understand what England meant. All I knew was that my parents were leaving, and I wasn't going with them. I thought it was temporary. I thought they'd come back in a few weeks. But weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. And the only family I knew was my aunt, stern, overworked, and already raising her own children. At first, there were promises, letters with words I couldn't fully read. Occasional phone calls where my mother's voice would break through the crackle of the line. She always said the same thing: "We'll come for you soon. Be patient." But soon never came. Instead, I watched from afar as photos arrived of my siblings in England, smiling in front of schools, on Christmas mornings, holding toys I could only dream of. They looked happy. They looked whole. And me? I was the forgotten one. My aunt wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. She had her own children to care for, and I was another mouth to feed, another burden left behind. Meals were scarce. Clothes were hand-me-downs, often ripped or 2 sizes too small. When I asked about my parents, my aunt would sigh and say, "They're working for a better life for all of us." But I didn't feel like I was part of all of us. I felt like an afterthought. School was a struggle, not because I wasn't smart, but because hunger gnawed at my stomach and shame weighed on my shoulders. Other kids had parents cheering at sports days. I had an aunt waving impatiently when she remembered. I began to feel invisible. Every letter, every phone call from my parents carried the same vague promise: "We'll bring you soon." But as the years passed, hope shrank into bitterness. Why didn't they take me? Why was I left behind? What made me less worthy than my siblings overseas? By the time I was a teenager, the weight of abandonment had already twisted something inside me. I envied my siblings, their accents, their neat clothes, their photos in front of cars and houses in England. They had parents. I had survival. And in the silence of nights, lying on a thin mattress in my aunt's cramped house, I whispered the same question over and over. Why wasn't I enough to take with you? The years that followed hardened me. My aunt did what she could, but resources were tight. I picked up odd jobs before I was even legally allowed to work, carrying loads at the market, washing cars, anything to bring in a little money. Every coin I earned felt like proof I could stand alone. But it also deepened the wound. Why was I working to survive while my parents built a life elsewhere? I tried to bury the pain. I told myself they must have had reasons. That maybe one day, when they finally came back, they would explain everything and I would understand. But beneath the surface, the bitterness grew roots. The first time they visited, I was already 16. They arrived in shiny clothes, speaking with accents that felt foreign. My father smiled, my mother hugged me tightly, but the gap between us was wide. They brought gifts, clothes that didn't fit, sweets that melted in the heat before they reached me. They asked about school, about my aunt, about life here. And then, as quickly as they came, they left again. The promises returned. "Next time, you'll come with us." But I knew better by then. I knew promises were just words, and words meant nothing without action. Still, part of me clung to hope. Because even when your parents abandon you, a piece of you still wants their love. So I waited. I endured. I carried the weight of being left behind, not knowing that the scars forming then would follow me into adulthood, scars that would shape every choice, every failure, every fight I had yet to face. And one day, those same scars would become the reason I rose. The irony? The parents who left me behind would be the ones begging me to save them. But that part of the story comes later. For now, all I knew was the sting of goodbye and the echo of a promise that never came true. People often say childhood wounds fade with time. They don't. They deepen. The years after my parents left weren't just hard. They were shaping me into someone they wouldn't recognize. And maybe that was the cruelest part. While they built a life abroad, I was living one they never bothered to see. My aunt's house was small, overcrowded, and filled with tension. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. She had her own children, her own struggles. To her, I was an extra mouth, another responsibility she hadn't asked for. I got food, but never enough. I had clothes, but always secondhand. I had a place to sleep, but never a place to belong. Whenever I complained, she'd remind me sharply, "Your parents are working hard for a better life. Don't be ungrateful." But gratitude was hard to muster when the better life seemed to exist only for my siblings in England. I remember school vividly. Not the lessons, but the shame. Classmates would whisper, "His parents are abroad. Why is he still here?" They expected me to be one of the lucky ones, the child whose parents sent money, who wore fresh shoes and carried new textbooks. But my reality was different. The money my parents sent barely covered my aunt's bills. What was left trickled down, thin and inconsistent. So while my siblings wore coats in England, I walked to school barefoot, sometimes dust caking my feet. And every time a teacher asked me to write an essay about my family, I froze. What family? The ones who left me? Or the one who tolerated me? By my teenage years, the bitterness had roots. I stopped talking about my parents. When classmates asked, I shrugged them off. When my aunt mentioned them, I left the room. But deep down, I read every letter they sent, listened to every call with my ear pressed against the wall. And each word they spoke to me, "Soon, be patient, will bring you," was a blade turning deeper. Soon never came. Patience was just a leash to keep me quiet. And will bring you. That was the biggest lie of all. The emptiness bled into other parts of my life. I was angry, always angry, at my aunt and my parents, at the world. I picked fights at school. I chased the wrong friends, looking for belonging where I could find it. Alcohol came first, then other vices. Anything to fill the hole they left. Teachers called me troubled. Neighbors whispered I was going the wrong way. But none of them knew the truth, that I was just trying to drown out the sound of that slammed door, the memory of my mother's quick kiss goodbye. I also learned to survive. At 14, I started working at the market, carrying heavy loads for strangers, shining shoes, selling odds and ends just to put coins in my pocket. It wasn't much, but it was mine. When I looked at my siblings' photos, their matching outfits, their bright smiles in front of neat little houses in England, I told myself, at least what I earn with my own hands. But envy still burned. Why them and not me? What made me the one left behind? The first time my parents visited after almost a decade, I was 16. They came with wide smiles, carrying gifts in shiny bags. My siblings trailed behind them, polite but distant, as if we were cousins meeting for the first time. My father clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You've grown tall." My mother hugged me quickly and whispered, "We'll bring you soon." I want to scream at them. Why not years ago? Why not when I needed you most? But I swallowed it, because even then, even after all those years, part of me still longed for their approval. So I took the gifts, shirts too big, sweets that melted before they arrived. I smiled weakly and nodded when they told me to keep studying hard. And then they left again, their absence heavier than before. By the time I turned 18, I had already lived a lifetime. Failed relationships, broken trust, habits I couldn't shake. My aunt had grown tired of me, her patience stretched thin. I felt like a stray dog, tolerated but never loved. The only thing that kept me moving was a stubborn voice inside me, whispering, "One day, you'll show them. One day, they'll regret leaving you." I didn't know how or when, but I knew the anger burning in me couldn't stay buried forever. Because the life they didn't see, the hunger, the shame, the scars, was forging me into something else. Something harder. Something they wouldn't be ready for when they finally called me to join them. People say adulthood is when you finally take control of your life. For me, adulthood was when the damage from my childhood began to bleed into everything. The boy they left behind had grown into a man, but the wounds of being abandoned didn't heal. They deepened, and they showed themselves in every choice I made. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had already lived through enough pain for a lifetime. My first marriage was a disaster. I thought marriage would give me stability, the sense of belonging I'd craved since childhood. I wanted a home, a family that wouldn't walk out on me like mine had. But instead of building a partnership, I brought my baggage with me. The anger, the insecurity, the fear of being left again. I was jealous, suspicious, quick to lash out. Every argument with my wife felt like abandonment all over again. When she eventually left, taking what little we had, I wasn't surprised. But it didn't hurt any less. The second marriage was worse. I rushed into it, thinking maybe the first had just been bad luck. But this time, my demons were louder. The drinking had started by then, and with it came reckless decisions. Nights spent in bars, mornings spent in regret. She left me too. And after that, I stopped trying. I told myself I wasn't meant for love. That people always left. That maybe my parents had seen the truth from the beginning when they chose to leave me behind. Vices became my escape. Alcohol first, then gambling. I wasn't trying to live. I was trying to forget. Forget the look in my father's eyes when he walked away. Forget the laughter of my siblings in the photos from England. Forget the voice of my aunt scolding me for being ungrateful. But the more I tried to forget, the deeper I sank. Debts piled up. Jobs slipped through my fingers. I was always the man people whispered about, the one who never quite got it together. And every time I looked in a mirror, I saw failure staring back. Exactly what my father's absence had told me I was. What made it worse was the contrast. Through scattered calls and visits, I saw glimpses of my siblings' lives. They had stable jobs, clean clothes, accents that carried opportunity. They talked about university degrees, travels across Europe, holidays I couldn't imagine. And me? I was the forgotten one, stumbling through broken relationships and bad habits, too ashamed to even tell them the truth of my life. They lived the life I was supposed to have, the one stolen from me when my parents left me behind. The day I hit rock bottom is burned into me. I was sitting outside a rundown bar, my last few coins gone, my head pounding. A friend had just told me he wouldn't cover my debts anymore. My aunt had long since stopped trying to help. I had no one. I remember whispering to myself, maybe Dad was right to leave me. Maybe Mom knew I'd turn out this way. And for a moment, I believed it. I believed I was broken beyond repair. But something strange happened in that moment of despair. Instead of collapsing, a small, stubborn ember lit inside me. Because as much as I hated myself, as much as I believed their abandonment had ruined me, I also felt rage. Not at myself, but at them. They had left me behind. They had chosen a life without me. They had turned me into this. And if I was broken, then the blame wasn't only mine. It was theirs too. That thought carried me through the next years. Not healing, not hope, but anger. A fire that wouldn't go out. And though I didn't know it yet, that fire would one day fuel something else. Because life is a cruel way of flipping the script. The parents who had left me behind, the siblings who had grown up in comfort, their lives weren't as untouchable as they looked. And when cracks finally appeared in their perfect picture, they would turn to the son they had abandoned. And I would be ready. For now, though, I was still stumbling, still fighting vices, still losing battles. I looked like a man beyond saving, a life ruined by choices and circumstances too heavy to bear. But deep inside, beneath the scars of abandonment, a new identity was waiting to emerge. Not the forgotten child, not the broken man, but the one who would rise when they least expected it. And when that day came, my revenge wouldn't be loud. It would be silent, cold, undeniable. The abandoned son becoming the savior of the very family that left him to rot. The call came on an ordinary evening. I was sitting on a cracked plastic chair outside my aunt's house, nursing a cheap drink when the phone buzzed. My aunt answered first, her face tightening as she listened. Then she handed me the phone. "It's your mother," she said flatly. For a moment, I froze. My mother's calls were rare. Her voice, even rarer. I pressed the phone to my ear, half expecting the usual polite questions and vague promises. But this time was different. "Your father and I have decided," she said. "It's time for you to come to England." The words didn't sink in at first. "Come where?" I asked dumbly. "To England," she repeated, as if it was obvious. "You'll live with us now, with your siblings." Her voice carried a tone of finality, like she was doing me a favor. Like this was the grand solution to all my years of struggle. I felt my chest tighten, not with joy, but with something closer to rage. Now, after decades, after failed marriages, debts, and years of being the forgotten child, now they remembered me. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why it had taken so long. But all I managed was a stiff, okay, because deep down, part of me still longed for what I'd been denied. A chance to belong. The process was slow. Paperwork, documents, endless questions about my adaptation. My parents sent money for the passport, for the ticket, for clothes that would look appropriate when I arrived. And all the while, my aunt kept her distance. She'd done her part. She'd raised me, however reluctantly. Now the responsibility was shifting back where it belonged. But I couldn't shake the bitterness. When I packed my bag, I realized how little I owned. A few shirts, a pair of worn shoes. The rest of my life fit into a single small suitcase. I wasn't traveling with excitement. I was traveling with scars. The flight was long, suffocating. I stared out the window at the endless clouds, trying to imagine what England would feel like. Will my siblings welcome me? Will my parents finally treat me as their son, not their leftover responsibility? Or would I always be the outsider, the one who was left behind? By the time the plane touched down, my chest was heavy with dread. They met me at the airport, my parents standing side by side with smiles that felt rehearsed. My siblings clustered around them, taller, cleaner, sharper than I remember from photos. My father clapped me on the back. "Welcome home, son," he said, though his tone carried more formality than warmth. My mother hugged me briefly, then stepped back to look me over. "You've changed," she said, her eyes scanning the scars time had left on me. My siblings offered polite nods, half curious, half indifferent. To them, I was more stranger than brother. And just like that, I knew this wasn't home. This was another test. Life in England was nothing like I imagined. The houses were neat, the streets orderly, the air colder than anything I'd felt. But beneath the surface, I felt the same loneliness I had back at my aunt's. My siblings spoke quickly, their words laced with slang I didn't understand. They laughed at jokes that made no sense to me. They rolled their eyes when I mispronounced words. At dinners, conversations flowed around me, leaving me silent at the edge of the table. "You'll adapt," my father said once, noticing my silence. "Just watch and learn. Adapt." That was the word they kept using. But what they really meant was, erase who you were and become who we want you to be. My past weighed heavily here. The failed marriages, the debts, the vices, I couldn't hide them. When I slipped up, when I drank too much or lost my temper, my siblings whisper behind my back, "He's damaged." I overheard one of them say. No wonder they left him. That cut deeper than anything my parents had said, because it wasn't just abandonment anymore. It was judgment. I wasn't just the outsider. I was the burden. But in the quiet of those long nights, lying awake in a foreign land, I told myself something different. I hadn't survived all those years just to crumble now. I had endured hunger, shame, heartbreak, and betrayal. I had clawed my way through a life they never saw, never cared to understand. And if I could survive that, I could survive here. No, not just survive. One day I would rise. And when I did, the same family that mocked me, judged me, and abandoned me would see the truth. The son they had left behind was the one they should never have underestimated. They called it home, but it never felt like mine. Living under the same roof with my parents and siblings in England should have closed the distance between us. Instead, it magnified it. Every meal, every conversation, every silence reminded me that no matter how many years passed, I would always be the outsider. At first, my parents tried to pretend nothing had happened. They spoke to me as though I had simply been away at school, as though we hadn't been separated by oceans and decades. "How are you settling in?" my mother asked, her tone polite, almost clinical. My father was harsher. "You need to catch up. Your siblings are years ahead of you. Don't embarrass us." It was always about comparison. My siblings had polished accents, neat careers, and spotless records. I had scars, debts, and a history they whispered about when they thought I couldn't hear. To them, I wasn't a brother. I was a cautionary tale dragged into their perfect world. The pressure came quickly. You need to get a proper job, my father barked one evening. Not these odd shifts. Something respectable. You should think about remarrying, my mother added. A wife could help you straighten out. Respectable. Straighten out. Their words cut sharper than they realized. They wanted me to erase who I was, the man forged in struggle, the survivor of abandonment, and replace it with some neat version that matched their polished family image. But I couldn't erase myself. I wasn't broken because I was weak. I was broken because they had left me behind. And now they wanted me to pretend that never happened. My siblings didn't make it easier. They spoke around me, not to me. At family gatherings, they exchanged stories of trips I had never taken, schools I had never seen, jokes I couldn't understand. Once, at a dinner table, my younger brother leaned over to another sibling and whispered just loud enough. No wonder they didn't bring him earlier. He'd have dragged us all down. I clenched my fists under the table, swallowing the anger like poison. Because what could I say? He wasn't entirely wrong. On the surface, I was the weak link, the one with failed marriages, the one who had nothing to show but scars. But deep inside, I knew something none of them did. Scars aren't weakness. They're armor. And one day, they would see just how strong they had made me by abandoning me. The hardest moments weren't the words, though. It was the silence. The way my father avoided looking at me when boasting about my siblings' achievements. The way my mother forced a smile when introducing me to friends, as if ashamed to explain who I really was. The way my siblings dismissed me with a shrug, as though I was background noise in their picture-perfect lives. I existed in the same house, but I wasn't part of the family. I was still the boy left behind. I tried to adapt, at least at first. I worked jobs they considered beneath them. I swallowed my pride and ignored the whispers. I studied the way they spoke, the way they moved, the way they carried themselves, hoping I could blend in. But blending in meant losing myself. And every time I tried, the bitterness flared again. Because I hadn't been given a chance to grow up in this world. They had stolen that from me. And now they wanted me to erase the life they had forced me to live. It wasn't fair, and it wasn't going to last. The turning point came one evening at a family dinner. My father raised a toast to my siblings, praising their achievements. One had graduated with honors. Another was working at a prestigious firm. His voice swelled with pride, and his eyes shifted to me. And as for you, he paused, smirk tugging at his lips. Well, you'll get there. Hopefully. Laughter rippled around the table, quiet but sharp. My siblings hid their smiles behind glasses of wine. My mother said nothing. I sat there, staring at my plate, my hands trembling with rage. It was the same feeling I'd had as a child when they left me at my aunt's doorstep. The same feeling I'd had when my marriages crumbled, when a bottle became my comfort, when strangers pitted me while my family forgot me. But this time it didn't crush me. It fueled me. Because in that moment, I made a silent vow. One day, the laughter would stop. One day, I wouldn't just get there. I'd rise higher than all of them. And when I did, I wouldn't need to mock them back. My existence would be the revenge. You can change your surroundings, but the past follows you everywhere. When I first arrived in England, I thought maybe the distance would wash me clean. New streets, new skies, new opportunities. But the ghosts of my old life didn't disappear at the airport. They boarded the plane with me. And here, in this land of order and rules, my old habits clashed violently with my new world. The drinking was the worst. Back home, no one cared if I stumbled drunk down a dirt road. Here, it was different. One night out turned into a fight with strangers outside a pub. The police were called. My father bailed me out, his face stone cold as he signed the paperwork. When we got home, he exploded. You embarrass us. Do you think this is your village? This is England. You can't behave like some stray dog here. His words cut deep, but not as deep as his eyes. Eyes that held no empathy, no understanding. Just judgment. And yet I couldn't stop. Because drinking wasn't just a vice. It was the only way I knew to silence the voices in my head. The voices that whispered. They left you. You're worthless. You'll never belong. Gambling followed. Casinos here gleamed with lights and promises, but they chewed me up the same way they had back home. I'd spend what little I earned, hoping for one big win to erase my shame. It never came. Instead, debts piled up. My siblings found out. They whispered behind closed doors, calling me the same old failure. One night, I overheard my younger brother say, "No wonder they left him behind. He's useless." That sentence, those words, burned me, because deep down, a part of me feared he was right. But life has a way of breaking you before it remakes you. The lowest point came one freezing night when I staggered home drunk and slipped on the icy pavement. I lay there, shivering, staring up at the dark sky. For a moment, I thought of just staying there, letting the cold swallow me. No one would miss me. Not really. But then something inside me sparked. A memory. Me at 16, watching my parents drive away after their first visit, gifts in their hands, promises in their mouths. The shame, the emptiness, the vow I whispered to myself that one day I'd make them regret leaving me. That memory pulled me up from the pavement. Because maybe they were right. Maybe I was broken. Maybe I was a failure. But what if I wasn't? What if all the pain, all the scars, all the abandonment wasn't proof of weakness, but proof of survival? I started small. I cut back on the drinking. Not all at once. I wasn't strong enough for that, but slowly. Days without it stretched into weeks. When the cravings came, I forced myself into work, any work I could find. Construction, deliveries, cleaning. I didn't care if it was beneath me. Nothing was beneath me anymore. And in the rhythm of work, I found something I hadn't felt in years: control. The gambling was harder. The rush was addictive, the promise of escape too sweet. But each time I lost, I forced myself to write down the debt in a notebook, staring at the growing numbers until I couldn't lie to myself anymore. I told myself, every coin wasted is proof they were right. Every coin saved is proof they were wrong. Slowly, the debts shrank. Slowly, I began to breathe again. My siblings noticed the change, but not kindly. "Oh, so now he wants to be responsible," one scoffed. "Give it a month," another muttered. "He'll be back to his old self." My parents said nothing. My father's eyes still carried that cold weight of disappointment. My mother avoided mine altogether. But I didn't care anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't living for their approval. I was living to prove them wrong. The shift wasn't just financial. It was mental. Every time I felt the urge to drink, I remembered that night on the pavement. Every time I wanted to gamble, I remember my brother's sneer. Every time I felt weak, I remember my father's silence. They thought I would crumble. They thought I'd always be the abandoned one, the outsider, the burden. But I was starting to see myself differently. Not as a victim, not as a failure, as a survivor. And survival, I realized, was the best foundation for success. Because my siblings had grown up in comfort. They didn't know hunger. They didn't know shame. They didn't know what it felt like to be unwanted. But I did. And that meant when life tested us, I would endure in ways they never could. One night, staring at my nearly empty notebook, debts almost cleared, small savings forming, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." Because I knew what was coming. The cracks in my parents' perfect family were already forming. The debts, the secrets, the financial troubles they hid behind closed doors. And when it all came crashing down, they would look for someone to save them. They wouldn't look at me first. But in the end, they would have no choice. And that moment would be my revenge. For years, my parents had worn their life in England like a crown. To everyone back home, they were the success story, the ones who had made it. But what no one saw was that the crown was fake gold. And cracks had already begun to spread beneath the shine. It started with whispers, phone calls taken in hushed voices, bills tucked quickly into drawers, arguments muffled behind bedroom doors. My siblings dismissed it whenever I asked. "Don't worry about it," they'd say. "Dad always sorts things out." But I knew the look in my father's eyes. It wasn't the look of control. It was the look of a man barely holding on. And I'd seen that look before, in myself back when I was drowning in debt and vices. The first visible sign came when my younger sister's tuition payment bounced. She stormed through the house, waving the letter in her hand, demanding answers. "Dad, what's going on? Why didn't it clear?" My father snapped back. "Do you think money grows on trees?" It was a sharp crack in the facade, the first time the image of endless stability faltered. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Debt collectors began calling. Sometimes they rang the house phone, their voices sharp and demanding. My father would slam the receiver down, face flushed with anger. "Scammers," he muttered. But I knew better. Other times, letters arrived. My mother would snatch them quickly, stuffing them into drawers. But I caught glimpses, red stamps, bold print, words like final notice. The empire they'd abandoned me to build was collapsing, and I was watching it crumble brick by brick. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I was the one called a failure. I was the one who lived with debts, with shame, with survival as my only skill. My parents had laughed at my struggles. My siblings had sneered at my scars. Now here they were, drowning in the same waters they had mocked me for sinking in. The difference? I had learned to swim. They hadn't. One evening, I walked into the living room to find my father sitting in the dark, a stack of bills in his hands. His face was lined, older than I remembered, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see judgment in his eyes. I saw fear. But when he noticed me, his pride snapped back like a mask. "Go to bed," he muttered. "This isn't your concern." I didn't argue, but I filed the moment away. Because I knew the truth now. The man who had abandoned me, mocked me, and forced me to carry scars alone was just as fragile as I had once been. The tension grew thicker each day. Arguments erupted over money, over expenses, over who was to blame. My siblings, once so confident, grew restless. They cut back on outings, whispered in corners, avoided the truth. But I didn't avoid it. I faced it head on because I had lived it before. And quietly, I began preparing. By this time, I had carved out a fragile but growing stability for myself. My debts were gone, my drinking under control. I've been saving from every odd job, every paycheck, every contract I could grab. It wasn't much compared to the mountain of debt my parents carried. But it was real, it was steady, and more importantly, it was mine. For the first time in my life, I felt something dangerous and powerful. I had what they didn't: control. One night, I overheard my siblings arguing in the kitchen. "They're drowning us with their mistakes," one hissed. "I can't believe this is happening," another muttered. "What are we going to do?" Their voices trembled with panic, the kind of panic I knew too well. I sat quietly in the shadows, listening. Because soon, they would all look for someone to save them. And the irony would be delicious. The boy they had left behind, the brother they mocked, the son they called a failure. He was going to be their lifeline. And when that day came, I wouldn't need to shout. I wouldn't need to remind them of their cruelty. My very existence would be the reminder. The crown they had worn so proudly was slipping. And soon, they would have no choice but to hand it to me. It's strange, the way pain prepares you. For years, my life was nothing but hardship, hunger, broken marriages, debts, addictions. I had been to the bottom more times than I could count. But those years, those scars, they did something my parents never expected. They taught me how to survive where others would drown. And now, as their carefully polished world began to collapse, I realized I wasn't drowning anymore. I was rising. It didn't happen overnight. I started small, working jobs my siblings turned their noses up at: construction, warehouse shifts, late-night cleaning contracts. Work they thought was beneath the family image. But every paycheck, no matter how small, I saved. Every coin was a reminder that I was no longer the reckless man lying drunk in the street. I was building something. Opportunity came when a friend I'd met on a night shift told me about a small property investment group. At first, I laughed. Me? Invest? I had been broke for most of my life. But he explained how it worked. Small contributions pooled together to buy rundown houses, renovate them, and rent them out. It sounded impossible, but it also sounded like the only way forward. So I took the risk. And for once, the risk paid off. Within months, I saw returns. Not huge, but enough to grow. Enough to fuel the fire in my chest. While my parents had bills and my siblings whispered about debts, I was quietly turning mine into profit. I stayed disciplined. I didn't tell anyone. Not my father, not my mother, not the siblings who still mock me behind closed doors. Let them laugh. Let them sneer. The longer they underestimated me, the sweeter the reveal would be. The change didn't just happen in my bank account. It happened in me. I started walking differently, speaking differently, My shoulders straightened, my voice steadied. I no longer felt like the broken outsider they had abandoned. I felt like a man finally in control of his own life. And control is power. My siblings noticed, of course. Where's he getting money from? One whispered when I helped pay for groceries without hesitation. Don't tell me he's back to gambling, another muttered. I ignored them, because for once, I didn't need their approval. I didn't even need their doubt. I had myself, and that was enough. The turning point came one afternoon when a debt collector knocked at our door. My father tried to argue, tried to bluff, but the man was firm. Final notice. Immediate payment required. My siblings panicked. My mother's face went pale. And me? I stepped forward. How much? I asked. They all turned to me, shocked. My father's eyes narrowed. My siblings scoffed. But when the collector named the figure, I reached into my account and paid it. Silence fell over the room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the burden. I was the solution. Of course, they didn't thank me. Not really. My father muttered, "Don't think this makes you special." My siblings sneered. You must have gotten lucky. But I saw it in their eyes, the flicker of something new. Dependence. The same son they had left behind, mocked, and dismissed had just done what none of them could. And they knew it. I didn't stop there. Every time a bill came due, every time a debt threatened to crush the family, I was there. Quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. And with each rescue, their silence grew heavier. Their pride cracked a little more. Their laughter faded into tight-lipped stares. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The failure was keeping the family afloat. One night, I caught my father watching me as I counted receipts at the table. His face was hard, unreadable. Finally, he muttered, "You've changed." I looked up, met his gaze, and simply said, "No, I've always been this. You just never looked close enough." He didn't reply. He didn't laugh. He just sat there, silent, with the weight of my words pressing down on him. And that was when I realized this was my revenge. Not screaming, not demanding apologies, not dragging up the past. My revenge was silent, undeniable power. The abandoned son had risen. And now, the family that once left me behind was leaning on me to survive. Power doesn't always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, creeping in until suddenly everyone realizes the balance has changed. That's what happened in my family. For years, they laughed at me, mocked me, left me behind. But now, without a single word, I was the one they depended on. And they hated it. It started subtly. Whenever bills came in, my father would avoid eye contact. He no longer barked orders about responsibility. Instead, he slid envelopes toward me on the table, as though passing off the burden he couldn't carry anymore. My mother, once so distant, began calling me more often. "Can you help with this payment? Do you think you could cover your sister's tuition?" My siblings, who once sneered at my scars, now spoke carefully around me, their tones softening whenever money came up. The very people who abandoned me were now leaning on me to save them. And I let them, because every request, every silent plea, was another reminder of how wrong they had been. But make no mistake, I wasn't doing it out of love. I wasn't trying to buy their approval or mend broken bonds. No, my help was my revenge. Each payment I made, each debt I cleared, was a cold slap of reality they couldn't escape. The son they left behind was now the one saving them. One evening, as I wrote out a transfer to cover yet another overdue bill, my younger brother muttered under his breath, "Why should he be the one to handle everything? He's not better than us." I looked up slowly, meeting his glare. "I don't think I'm better," I said calmly. "But the difference is, I survived what you couldn't. That's why I can stand now while you're crumbling." He had no reply, because deep down, he knew it was true. The more I rose, the more their pride collapsed. My siblings stopped bragging about their achievements. My parents stopped boasting about their perfect life. Because how could they? The illusion had shattered. The family they had built in comfort was standing only because the abandoned son held it up. I began to see it in their faces, the shame, the unease, the bitterness. They couldn't thank me. Their pride wouldn't allow it. But they also couldn't deny me. At dinners, conversations grew quieter when I entered the room. My father no longer mocked me. My siblings no longer dared to sneer. I had become the silent force in the house, the one they tiptoed around. And the irony was exquisite, because for years I was invisible. Now I was undeniable. The moment I'll never forget came late one night. I found my father sitting in the living room, the lights off, staring at a pile of unpaid notices. His shoulders were slumped, his hands trembling. He looked up when I entered, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not pride, not anger, respect. He didn't say it out loud. His pride wouldn't let him. But the silence between us spoke volumes. And in that silence, I finally felt it, victory. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about shouting or throwing their betrayal in their faces. It was about living in a way that made their mockery meaningless. It was about proving, without a single word, that they had abandoned the wrong son. As I went to bed that night, I thought back to the little boy standing at the doorway, watching his parents leave for England, clutching a toy car, and wondering why he wasn't enough. That boy had been broken, scarred, forgotten. But now he was the backbone of the very family that once left him behind. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. People imagine revenge as fire, loud, blazing, destructive. But mine was nothing like that. My revenge was cold, silent. It was in every bill I paid while my siblings looked down at their plates that IT was in every debt I cleared while my father clenched his jaw and said nothing at IT was in every problem I solved that they couldn't touch. The family that abandoned me had no choice but to lean on me. And that was enough. The day the acknowledgement came, it wasn't with a speech. It wasn't with tears or apologies. It was in a single moment that told me everything I needed to know. We were sitting around the table when my sister asked my father about a loan he'd been trying to settle. He sighed heavily and said, "Don't worry. He'll handle it." And then he looked at me, not as the failure, not as the outsider, as the one holding everything together, the son they left behind. The silence that followed was thick. My siblings shifted uncomfortably. My mother stared at her plate. No one dared laugh anymore. No one dared sneer. Because the truth was undeniable now. The child they abandoned had become the savior of the family. But here's the thing. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt empty. Because revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just makes them visible. And as I sat there, the weight of years of abandonment pressing down on me, I realized something. I didn't want their gratitude. I didn't want their apologies. I wanted them to live with the shame. To wake up every morning knowing they had left the wrong child behind. Later that night, my father came to my room. He stood in the doorway, silent, his pride still clinging to him like a dying shadow. Finally, he muttered, "You've done well." That was it. No apology. No recognition of the years I lost. Just those 3 words. And I looked at him, the man who once walked away from me without looking back, who had built a family without me, who had called me nothing but a failure. And I smiled. "Of course I did," I said softly. "I had no choice." He flinched, just slightly, before turning and leaving the room. And in that moment, I knew I had won. Because the worst punishment isn't anger. It isn't revenge shouted in someone's face. The worst punishment is silence. The silence of knowing the child you abandoned became stronger without you. The silence of knowing the son you mocked became the one who saved you. The silence of realizing your laugh has died, replaced by respect you can't bring yourself to admit out loud. That silence was my victory. I think about that little boy sometimes, the one clutching the toy car as his parents drove away. He thought he wasn't enough. He thought he'd been forgotten forever. But he was wrong. He wasn't forgotten. He was forged. And though the scars will never disappear, they became the very armor that carried me to this moment. So when people ask me now how I survived, how I turned pain into power, I tell them this. Revenge doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with silence, with success, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing the people who left you can never escape the truth of who you've become. And the truth is this. I was the son they left behind, and I became the man they could never ignore. If your family ever underestimated you, tell me in the comments how you turned their doubt into fuel. Subscribe to this channel for more shocking family betrayal and revenge stories that don't miss the next twist. It's always closer than you think.